Gentlemen, I think we're ready to get our program started, but please continue to enjoy your lunch and enjoy your dessert. I'm waiting to see if Dr. Cigarroa is going to eat his dessert or not. If he does, then that's my thumbs up. We've got an excellent panel for you today, and we're delighted that Dr. Larry Faulkner has agreed to organize and moderate our panel. Dr. Faulkner earned his bachelor's degree at SMU in chemistry and PhD from UT Austin in chemistry. He had a distinguished career as a professor at Harvard University and the University of Illinois. He rose through the ranks at Illinois to become dean and provost, and in 1998 he was selected as the 27th president of the University of Texas at Austin. He served with great distinction in that role for 8 years, and of course did not retire after stepping down as president. He went on to lead the Houston Endowment and been deeply involved in a number of major national initiatives focused on higher education. Furthermore, Dr. Faulkner was instrumental in the early days of TAMEST and was one of the people who literally made TAMEST happen with Senator Hutchison and others. Without any further delay, please join me in thanking Dr. Faulkner for chairing the panel, and let me turn it over to him.
Well, thank you, David. Good afternoon, everyone. I welcome you all to this final session of a superb TAMEST annual conference. Maybe I can take just a moment to allow us all to thank Tinsley Oden for a fabulous organizational job. We're fortunate to be joined today by 3 strong leaders from the Texas legislature, all with particular interests in higher education. Let me introduce them. I'll be starting over on the, I guess it must be your right. Senator Judith Zaffirini, representing the 21st Senatorial District, extending from Laredo to the suburbs of San Antonio and Corpus Christi, is the second highest ranking member of the Texas Senate. She is a member of the Senate Higher Education Committee and was chair of that committee from 2006 to 2012. She's also co-chair of the Joint Oversight Committee on Higher Education Governance, Excellence, and Transparency. From great personal experience, I can say that there has been no greater friend of higher education in Texas state government than Senator Zaffirini. Let's welcome Senator Zaffirini. Representative Diane Patrick, representing the 94th House District in Tarrant County, stretching from the southeast portion of Fort Worth across Arlington, was first elected in 2006. She is currently vice chair of the House Higher Education Committee and is a member of the House Appropriations Committee. Included in her district is the University of Texas at Arlington. Let's welcome Representative Patrick. Representative Donna Howard, representing the 48th House District covering West and Southwest Austin, was also first elected in 2006. She is a member of the House Higher Education Committee and the House Appropriations Committee, including the Appropriations Subcommittee dealing with agencies of education. I'm pleased to say that Representative Howard is my representative in the Texas House. Let's welcome Representative Howard. Colleagues, we're privileged to have each of you with us, and we thank you for making the effort. The program for this session announced that Senator Robert Duncan would also participate. However, he suffered a loss in his family and had to alter his plans. Our thoughts and good wishes are with him. The plan is for the 4 of us to offer initial prepared remarks, and then the session will be open to questions from the audience. There will be a good long time for general discussion, so start marshaling things in your mind that you might like to ask about. I will begin with my own prepared remarks, and then we'll proceed to hear from Senator Zaffirini, Representative Patrick, and Representative Howard. By the way, I can't resist expressing my pleasure in being able to moderate a group of legislators, if only for an hour, after having been moderated by legislators for 8 years. This is a legislative panel on higher education, so it's fair to consider here any matter of public policy bearing on colleges, universities, medical institutions, and their allied research and outreach organization. There's plenty to talk about. Much has been in the news lately and in the private conversations of everyone in this room. But in the role of moderator, I hope to steer the discussion away from governance issues, which, though important, are largely local, about a few institutions and a small number of personalities. There are bigger issues facing higher education in America, certainly including Texas. The governance issues have drawn everyone's attention sharply away from the big long-term challenges. My hope is to give those challenges an hour hearing today with these important legislative leaders and before this very distinguished and influential audience. Let me make a point about perspective before I offer my list of pressing issues. I was fortunate to have spent my entire active career in higher education in jewels of the American firmament, in 3 of our land's greatest institutions. The distinguished members of TAMEST are also familiar with such places, since virtually all of you received your education at the graduate level at least in institutions of their kind. For a long time, my entire focus on higher education was on the sustenance and growth of the great research universities. I continue to believe that they are absolutely critical to the nation's ability to innovate and to develop young talent at the global leadership level, all of which is so critical to national security and national well-being. But in 6 years at Houston Endowment, from 2006 to 2012, I took on a more encompassing perspective. We were interested there in how to educate a whole society, a metropolitan area, a state, a nation. We focused on very fundamental things like how to get more kids to graduate from high school with better knowledge and skills, how to get more of them to seek post-high school education, and how to make it possible for more students to be successful after high school. Young Americans who obtain post-high school education gain it overwhelmingly in settings other than America's greatest research universities. As one looks at the issues before higher education, it is critical to think about how the whole machine works. My perspective on issues of higher education has also been recently adjusted by one other situation. After leaving Houston Endowment in 2012, I was asked to chair a presidential commission of the American Chemical Society, charged with a year-long critical review of graduate education in the chemical sciences. The commission was made up of sterling figures from academia and industry, and it undertook its work with great energy and honest judgment, reaching unanimously some serious recommendations for change. With that background, let me now give you my list of big issues for the future of higher education. First is the critical escalation of the price of undergraduate education, especially to middle-income families. This issue is, in fact, a marker for the collapse of the financial models used for undergraduate education, both public and private, for many decades. The educational cost of a single year at a Texas public university, just the cost of going to school, not living costs, is now 10 to 20% of the median household income in this state. which at about $50,000 might be lower than many in this audience would estimate. We often brag that Texas schools are less expensive than counterparts elsewhere, but for real people coming from real families, even Texas colleges, Texas public colleges, are expensive. They are especially so for middle-income families for whom there are few actual grants in aid. The picture for private schools is on a different scale, but it's getting out of hand too, especially for middle-income students. For these institutions, the financial model is collapsing just as surely, and they are left to look harder every year to fill their incoming class with people who can pay the freight. Half of America comes from households with less than $50K per year. How are we going to make a genuine, effective college education broadly available to motivated students of talent, not just to the richest 10% plus a few percent more who are granted scholarship support from institutions that can be held up by comparative wealth? This issue has little to do with Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, and MIT, which rely on truly massive endowments per enrolled student, but it has everything to do with the University of Texas at any city, with Texas State University, with Sam Houston, with the A&M Systems institutions, with Texas Tech and the University of Houston, with Baylor, SMU, TCU, and Southwestern at Georgetown. I personally believe that the time must come when legislative leaders and the leaders of higher education will have to hammer out a sound new financial model that can go decades further. It's not a job for a single Sunday afternoon. My second big issue is with unproductive effort and wasted resources. Everyone knows that America, including Texas, has a big problem with high school dropouts, especially in large urban districts. But most people are surprised to learn that we have more college dropouts in Texas than high school dropouts. Lots and lots of students start post-high school education and then take it nowhere. Income data from the U.S. Department of Labor shows that the earning power of some college, no degree, it's one of their categories, is just a little bit higher than the earning power of high school diploma. Students who do not take higher education to a credential are getting practically no economic return, yet they and taxpayers are investing heavily. Can't we do a better job with advising, diagnostics, and instructional design to improve the yield from all this expense and effort? The third issue I raise is with escalating debt loads. Student loan debt is now greater than total credit card debt, and it has been compounding at a rate close to 10%. This is a critical issue for the country, perhaps most of all because it forces young people to be unnaturally cautious and saps their freedom to undertake new venture. The renewal of social vitality that comes from inventions made by young people is well understood by all of us. It's time to look for ways to reduce their dependence on debt-financed post-secondary education. A fourth issue that I place before you is lost youth in graduate and professional education. As I mentioned earlier, I was involved just a year ago in a critical review of graduate education in the United States in the chemical sciences. One conclusion of that commission is this, and I'll quote from the report: talented young scientists and engineers in the chemical sciences may be delayed too long in reaching a stage of independent or highly responsible professional practice. Ways should be sought to provide opportunities for young people to reach this stage by their late 20s rather than their early to mid-30s, sometimes 40s now. For this audience, I don't need to say more. Everyone in this room understands the vitality that we are likely to be losing from a system of graduate education and early career development that has become far too lengthy and stiff. And finally, I give you a fifth issue, which is about opportunities to teach differently and more effectively. Everyone knows that there is great power in new communication tools and new ways to use information technology. There are bound to be ways to employ these things to solve problems in some of the issue areas that I've already identified. But it's fair to say that we don't yet know how. But we need to learn how. And while we are at that, we ought to re-examine every aspect of our packaging of educational experiences, including the length, intensity, and scheduling of coursework. But let me quickly note, too, that people rarely learn well without opportunities for extensive, informal interactions with teachers or fellow students. We must preserve an educational environment that continues to provide for such interactions. I could give you more issues, but that's enough for now. In many of these areas, experiments are needed, a notion familiar to this group. My advice to all leaders is to foster experimentation and critical evaluation. The scientific method is powerful and will work in this arena if tried seriously. But in the end, the biggest issues will also require a new social contract based on insightful public leadership, interested genuinely in public well-being for the long term. Thus, it is appropriate now to turn to comments from our distinguished panel of legislative leaders. We'll begin with Senator Zapparini.
Thank you so much, Dr. Faulkner, for such inspiring and interesting words. What a pleasure it is to be with you this afternoon, and especially to join my colleagues, Representative Diane Patrick and Representative Donna Howard. We are honored to address such a distinguished group, and we couldn't help but notice that you started with a United States Senator and now are ending with Texas legislators. So we believe that we are your transition back into the real world after this outstanding conference. We're proud to be with you and proud to be your guests, truly. At the end of my presentation, I will ask Betty Sue Masters to join us at the lectern. We are going to present to you a gavel for your academy to use at future meetings. It is a legislative gavel that I know you will enjoy at the end of my presentation. Nicholas Murray Butler, when he was Columbia University president, said some beautiful words about education in general. He said that the 5 tests of the evidence of an education were correctness and precision of the use of the mother tongue, refined and gentle manners, the result of fixed habit of thought and action, sound standards of judgment, of beauty and of worth, and a character based on those standards, power or the habit of reflection, and efficiency or the power to do. If he were writing those words today, he certainly would add other elements, including mastery and use of technology, and certainly the ability to perform adequately, if not outstandingly, in a global economy. And many of us would believe that he should also add love of football, especially at some institutions. But if you think about it, those words really encompass what you're doing, what we talk about when we talk about education in general, specifically correctness and precision in the use of the mother tongue. So important in any aspect of our careers, so important to you, because no matter how brilliant you may be, no matter how productive you may be, you have to communicate, and especially in your mother tongue, preferably in also at least a second language. And the fact that you're in a position to inspire others to do the same, I think is outstanding. Refined and gentle manners, certainly, because so many times we have wonderful researchers, wonderful professors, wonderful attorneys and doctors and all kinds of professionals who cannot communicate politely. And so that's tied in to refined and gentle manners and a character based on those standards. Certainly, sound standards of appreciation of worth and beauty. What is more beautiful than science? A scientific discovery, a scientific invention that can change the world. What is more worthy than research on subjects such as cancer? That is truly something that is so important to all of us. Power, or the habit of reflection, the essence of a researcher, whether you are in medicine or in engineering or in the sciences in general, it matters not. It is that power, that habit of reflection that brought you to where you are and will help you inspire others to follow you. And that is what's so important about efficiency, or the ability to do. And not only to do, but to be transformational and inspire others. I believe that when we talk about research, we have to look backward and forward simultaneously. And by that I mean we have to look backward to the pre-K level and ensure that in the future our students are prepared with excellence education from PK through 12 and beyond to the level where you are today and beyond that. But in order to accomplish those standards of excellence which we all crave and we all aspire to, we need funding. And frankly, ladies and gentlemen, as we help you transition into the real world, we have to underline the fact elections have consequences. Elections have consequences. When you vote, when you talk to candidates, you really should determine their stand on funding for research, their stand on funding for education in general, because we need to have adequate funding for higher education. There are so many people who bemoan the rise of tuition, and so do I. But why has tuition risen in Texas? Largely because state appropriations were reduced. And it is true that they were increased in 2015, but that's because they were 2013 rather, but that's because they were reduced in 2011. So they were increased in 2013 in relation to 2011, but not necessarily in relation to 2009 and before. Elections have consequences. Tuition revenue bond bills and other legislation related to funding are of critical importance. I was so proud in 2006 when we passed my tuition revenue bond bill that provided $1.9 billion in funding for higher education facilities. Those facilities helped us recruit the finest scholars. Those facilities helped us retain the best students and faculty members, and facilities are important. There are so many people who look down their nose at brick and mortar. Well, where are you going to teach? Where are you going to research if you don't have the very best possible facilities? And related to funding from the legislature is philanthropy. We must work hand in hand with philanthropists and try to encourage them to do even more. We have so many wonderful Texans who truly believe in higher education and have supported specifically research. But please note that research continues to be under attack. It is under attack by anti-intellectuals, by those who believe that research should be separated from teaching, by those who would go so far as the organization that in 2011 recommended to the legislature that no taxpayer money be used for research. Can you believe that? Can you believe that? They believe that research and teaching should be separated. Well, my response is that at a college, like at a community college, there is teaching and there is learning, and that is good. But at a university, at a health science center, at an institute, there may be teaching, but also there must be research, and they are intertwined. They are intertwined, and the true mission is not only to communicate a body of knowledge, but to contribute to that body of knowledge through discovery, through invention, through all those aspects of research that you certainly know better than I. We applaud your efforts so much, and I am so impressed by your goals, the fact that you want to be a source of expertise, the fact that you want to promote and facilitate innovation and collaboration, but especially the fact that you want to be a leader. And how can we lead together? I would invite you during this interim to meet with us, to tell us how we can do a better job of working with you in the future. What is your perspective about the legislation that we must file in 2015? What are your priorities for legislation? How can you help us convince our colleagues that higher education in general must be funded, but that critical to our striving for excellence is funding research? And we have done it to a great extent. In 2009, for example, I filed a bill and passed it as a House bill that created a pathway for emerging research universities to become national research universities. It started as a focus on emerging research universities, and before we passed the bill, it promoted excellence across the board for all institutions. But especially, it underscored the importance of research. And we created a fund that is a matching fund based on philanthropy. And that is what is so good, that it shows how we can all work together because government cannot do it alone. And it established another fund that rewards the emergency research universities as they meet certain criteria. But what we had to ensure is that in promoting the rise and development of emerging research universities, that we did not sacrifice our national research universities. It is amazing to me that we do not have more national research universities in the state of Texas. We have the University of Texas at Austin, and certainly we have Texas A&M and Rice University. But don't you believe we should have a lot more? Absolutely. So what can you and I do together during this interim, now before the next legislative session begins in January of 2015? What can we do to lay out a plan, lay out an agenda for the members of the legislature that says, this is the kind of legislation we need. These are the goals that we aspire to. This is the level of funding that we need. You are a source of expertise. You certainly are critical to the leadership of Texas and showing even the nation that Texas is a leader. But Texas should be number one in more ways than it already is. For example, it is my understanding, based on your information and source from Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison, who spoke to you earlier, that we have risen from 6th to 3rd in terms of federal funding for research. Isn't that wonderful? From 6th to 3rd, we should be first. We should be first. And what can we do to get there? What can we do to increase the number of members of the academies? What can we do together? And that is why I reach out to you today, not only to share a few thoughts with you, but especially to invite you to work with us more closely, because you are such an amazing source. And I believe very, very strongly that together we can continue to strive for excellence in ways that have been unheard of before. I live by the words of Aristotle, who said that excellence is a way of life. Excellence is not an act, but a habit. And when we make excellence a habit, it is our way of life. And that is how we approach every issue, every subject, every goal. Together we can strive more effectively and efficiently toward that goal. And I end with words that I wish had more credibility, but I say them to you only because, as researchers, I know they are your favorite words. Your grant has been approved. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Representative Patrick.
Thank you, Dr. Faulkner. And thank you, everyone, for inviting us to join this esteemed group. It's just such an honor to be here among you who have put Texas on the map. You've been a part of making Texas move from 6th place to 3rd place. You've been a part of what will happen in the future to make us number one. And it's your hard work that you're doing out there in our great universities across the state each and every day, for which we very much appreciate. And again, I thank you for the privilege of getting to speak with you, and but more importantly, I'm looking forward to the opportunity to hear from you what concerns you have, what questions that you have. I'm very proud to have members of the University of Texas at Arlington faculty here today. We have the Dean of Education, Dean of Engineering, Dr. I'm going to mess this up. I'm going to try to do it right. Bebi Hari, And we also have Provost Ron Eisenbaumer. So I'm very proud of UT Arlington, right in the heart of my House district, and I'm also very proud of all the universities. And I tell people like Dr. David Daniel and others when I travel around the state to our fine universities, I consider all of you to be my constituents. So again, we rarely make legislation that affects only one university. Typically, it affects the entire state, and I'm very aware of that and very proud. And I know that many of you travel to the Capitol on a regular basis and keep us informed, and we appreciate that. I'd like to take just a moment to talk about some of the points that Dr. Faulkner mentioned, because we share your concerns, and we think it's important that we get on the table things that we believe are working and things that we can do in the future that will make it even better. The concern about the escalation of tuition is one that people tell me about every day. Families and students tell me all the time it's breaking their backs, it's breaking their pocketbooks. It's become something that is making higher education less accessible and unaffordable for too many families. We took some steps, as Senator Zaffrini mentioned, to restore some of the funding cuts from 2011, and those were important steps. But again, when you look at the cost of tuition, it's breaking the backs of our students and their families. So what are some of the solutions? What are some of the things that we can say that we can do to stem this tide? And I would simply point to some of the solutions that you've already found. You have been looking in your communities for ways to be more efficient with taxpayer dollars. And some examples of that are the $10,000 degree, which some people said couldn't be done. But proudly, places like UT Arlington and Tarrant Community College and Arlington School District have collaborated and have produced a $10,000 degree. It starts when the student's in high school, taking dual credit classes, and moves through to the community college and the four-year institutions in a way that makes sense for some students. Not all students. It's a tough program, as it should be, but it does reduce the cost to the extent for which the student takes advantage of those kinds of opportunities. And the best part about that is that all the pieces of that solution were already there. They just had to sit down and work together and say, hey, this is a great way to do this. So I'm very proud of those types of initiatives, as well as other dual credit programs that are taking place. Another promising practice is that of having 15 hours cost a certain amount. If you take more than that, 18 hours, even 19, 21 hours, then it will be the same price. How many of the institutions are doing practices like that, where you have a set fee for 15 semester credit hours, and then if you take beyond that, it's the same price? Several of you at University of Texas at Dallas, absolutely. And furthermore, an interesting practice that's been taking place, and again, I refer to UT Arlington because that's where I live. I know many of you are doing similar practices, but this is the third year that they have frozen tuition, the third year. There are also other institutions that are taking advantage of a fixed tuition rate that remains the same. I believe University of Texas at Dallas, do you have that program in place? When you come in as a freshman, whatever it costs, that's the cost that is going to remain for that particular student until they graduate 4 years later. And I believe it is tied to that 4-year graduation rate, which is very important. One of the things that we're concerned about as we look at ways to reduce the cost to students, reduce the overall cost, reduce fees, and so forth, is that we have to remember that quality is the utmost importance. So anytime that we're talking about these kinds of things, we have to be sure that we remember that we're not reducing quality. We're reducing cost, but we're not reducing quality. One of the things of which I'm very proud that Senator Zaffrini was the Senate sponsor, and I was the House author of a bill that was kind of interesting as it wound through the legislative process. And you know, they say there's two things you don't want to watch being made, and that's laws and sausage. Well, when you look at this particular bill, you would understand exactly what I'm talking about, because at the very last minute of the session, in which we thought all hope was lost for this bill, we managed to get it through. And the bill was House Bill 2550, which increased graduate medical education funding. something that we desperately needed in this state. We had unfilled slots because we didn't have the money to fund it. So we were able to get that through, and 25 more slots for residencies, and also to have planning grants for 9 locations to start new residency programs. That is going to have a tremendous impact on the state given our physician shortage, especially in rural areas. So that was very exciting, and I know that many of you were working on that behind the scenes, and I thank you for that. Also, when we look at the issue of unproductive effort and wasted resources, we need to think creatively about solutions to that. We have too many graduates that are taking 150 hours or more to complete their undergraduate degree. So as policy, we need to think about, for example, right now, students who are they take beyond 150 semester credit hours, then they pay out-of-state tuition. We need to have a conversation. Should this amount of hours be lowered? Maybe it should be 135. Who knows? We need to discuss that and come up with perhaps a better way to incentivize students to complete their programs in a timely manner. Furthermore, we need to look at having better advising and look at different ways for advisors to be able to maximize their time with students. UT Arlington has a university center that's located literally in the center of the campus, in which it's a one-stop shopping for students to come by and get advice and be able to see advisors in a timely manner. These are the kinds of innovations that we want to see across the state. One of the things that we've talked about quite a bit, and I need your help on this as to whether or not you think a statewide articulation agreement is a good idea. Many institutions are completing and have articulation agreements with their community colleges. That's spotty, however. So maybe the best approach is a regional approach. We need your help to know the best way to make this efficient for students. We can't have students coming to our four-year institutions and losing so many hours. So again, that's something that's really important. We look at possibilities along the ideas of articulation agreements. And this will be something that will be more efficient for students. The issue of student debt loads, that just really, really upsets me when I realize that some of these students, when they get out, are going to have to take their entire lives to pay back the debt that they've incurred. So we need to look at ways that we can help them. One, obviously, is student aid. And we did put more money in the Texas grant program so that we can now fund about 85% of those students who are eligible. Texas has been, I think, a leader when it comes to recognizing that the diversity of our student body is the strength of our state. And we must have policies in place that will allow the diverse students, many times first-generation students, to be able to afford to get an undergraduate education that is of highest quality. When we look at the issue of the length of time for graduate and professional education, we need to think about ideas that perhaps we should reduce the length of time that's expected for a PhD or a doctorate degree, and maybe it should be a limit of 4 years, for example. One of the best things that I've seen work to get students who are in doctoral programs or master's programs out in a timely manner is the cohort model. And I'm a big fan of the cohort model because I think you not only get a little peer pressure, if you will, to get through the program in a timely manner, but more importantly, perhaps for the students, they get the support that they need from one another as they're moving through very challenging curriculum. So again, the cohort model is something that I think works, and we need to do what we can to encourage that, and also to have more clear-cut pathways for our students. And as they're moving through graduate programs, that they'll be more focused so that they're not taking 10 years to get a graduate degree or a PhD. The fifth issue is about the opportunity to teach differently. We have some innovative practices that are taking place in this state with regard to different lengths of time needed for a class, i.e. competency-based instruction. And the students are able to complete the class when they are competent. That's a novel idea, but it's working, and there are places that are doing this and doing it very well, and students appreciate the flexibility that it brings to the table, as well as the fact that it just makes sense. So again, we have a lot of practices that are out there that are being done around the state, and we certainly want to be sure, and I have to say that as a person who has a foot in the public education door and the higher education door, that we most of all want to be sure that our students are prepared when they come out of high school, that they're prepared to do college level work. And that's very important. And so with that, we want to focus on the whole vertical alignment from pre-K, I like to say from pre-K to 20, and make sure that our students are coming out college ready. And there are a lot of ways that we can do this, working together, public ed and higher ed, that will make it successful for our students. And I would end with saying to you, will you help us? Senator Zaffirini mentioned this, and I will emphasize it again. Will you help us find the solutions to these challenges? Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Howard.
Thank you. I'm actually going to put a timer here because I get to talking sometimes, and I just want to make sure I monitor myself a bit. Thank you so much for having us. It really is an honor to be here with you. I think it's very interesting how the three of us did not communicate about our presentations and coordinate in any fashion, and yet you're getting kind of a flavor of how we'll be approaching this from some different perspectives, but all interrelated and interconnected. I'm going to be probably looking at it a little more politically, not necessarily in a partisan sense, but in terms of how the politics affect what we do with higher education. And I certainly concur with Dr. Faulkner that the governance issues have gotten in the way of some of the more critical issues that we need to be focused on. That does get back to the politics sometimes, and we do have to pay attention to that some. I also agree that it is critical for us to be focused on what we need to do to invest in research, that is critical for the future health and well-being of our state. And I agree with my colleagues over here with how they've laid things out. I think that Senator Zaffirini gave you a nice global perspective of things, and that Representative Patrick talked about some of the specific areas of interest and concern that we're focused on. I'll try not to repeat that. I'm going to just kind of lay it out in a survey, if you will, from my perspective of where I think things are right now, and some of the things that I think happened in the last legislative session, and where I think we need to be going and what we need to be paying attention to. Clearly, if you're paying attention to politics, you know that education, higher education, but education in general, is front and center in the governor's race that we have before us right now. We know that when we look at the federal level, that what has gone on with the sequestration has had a huge impact on our state and on research dollars in our state, with grants not coming around that we were counting on, with lab closures, with layoffs. It has a significant impact on the people of this state. I'm glad to see that the federal government has passed a budget, that we are moving forward. And for me, what this signifies in particular is that there were some folks there that recognized that actually compromise is not a dirty word, that when we work together, we actually can move forward with something, and that is really better in the long run for all of us. You know, in Texas, when you look at our budget here, greater than 50% of our budget is for education. I'm talking about both public education and higher education, of course. But still, it's a huge part of what we're looking at when we're trying to determine how we can set up our state budget. And within this framework of how we do our budget, what we also need to be looking at are such things as Texas is #1 in the percentage of citizens without a high school diploma. Devastating to the future of our state. That we have had significant enrollment growth over the past decade. At the four-year institutions, 26.5% increase in enrollment. At community colleges, 63.9% increase in enrollment. This is phenomenal. And this is part of the effort that the state legislature, the state government has had with you to close the gaps by encouraging more of our students to actually pursue higher education. And a lot of that we can claim some success for. The numbers are there. But obviously, as you've heard from previous comments that have been made here, that completion is not where it needs to be. And that much of our focus now needs to be not only just on getting students in the doors, but helping them persist and helping them complete. 6-year completion rates at 4-year institutions, the figures that I have, 58%. 3-year transfer and completion rates at our 2-year institutions, 27%. The Higher Ed Coordinating Board indicated in the fall of 2011 that 31.5% of new high school graduates were not ready for freshman level courses. And that's out of a pool of students where only a little over 48% of the high school graduates actually enrolled in higher education. So within that context, you see we're talking about very few of our students being ready relative to what we need. Now, the budget, of course, has some huge issues. You've heard about some of those. Texas is a moderately wealthy state. We certainly have a tremendous amount of wealth in our state, and we have a tremendous amount of poverty, which kind of puts us in the middle if you're looking at personal wealth per capita. But we are 48%. We are 48th in the states in terms of expenditures per capita. So whatever the revenue is that we bring in, we are not meeting the needs, in my opinion, of the citizens of this state with very, very low expenditures, and yet we have very high expectations, I would suggest. So we're now looking at outcomes-based funding. That was referred to some. The idea being that if we have completion problems, if we need to get more students through the pipeline, if we are looking at a budget from a real business standpoint, which we seem to do more and more over at the Capitol, applying business principles to it, then we need to incentivize the outcomes that we want, which means we've had a lot of discussion over the past couple of sessions, but in particular this last session, on outcomes-based funding with a variety of proposals that came before us. You know, if you paid any attention to this, the technical colleges came up with a method of measuring their outcomes to where they are funded now 100% on those. It's a very unique situation, though, when you're talking about technical colleges. Community colleges, who were opposed to this at first, came together and came up with some metrics that they could agree upon that are going to dictate 10% of the funding that they receive. We've run into some real obstacles, though, with getting any consensus over at the legislature about how to impose this on our 4-year and higher institutions, and I would say rightly so. It is a very difficult thing, and whatever we put into place, if we're going to do this, needs to be done correctly, or we're going to end up hurting some of our institutions and how they move forward. Whatever we do, my recommendation has been that it needs to be on an individualized basis. We cannot have a one-size-fits-all in this state. As Diane, I also have served on the Higher Education Committee for several years now, and this year, for the first time, thanks to Speaker Strauss, whom I credit with doing a lot of good things at the legislature in terms of bringing us together to work together in a bipartisan fashion on solutions that are important to, in regard to the issues that our state is facing. But been on appropriations, looking at on the subcommittee looking at education. And I'll tell you, being on the Appropriations Committee really does give you more of an opportunity to be involved in some of the funding, obviously, that can go on behind closed doors, if you will, when you're working on the budget. We all have had opportunities to advocate for higher education, which I'm very appreciative of having that opportunity. There were some things that got through the budget this time as a result of our efforts up here, and many others. 2 in particular that I worked on that I'm proud of had to do with the Mathways program at the University of Texas, which is in conjunction with all 50 of our community college districts to address developmental education issues, which, as Dr. Faulkner pointed out, is a big problem in terms of the success of our students. Also funding for a research program from the A&M Engineering Experiment Station that impacts those of us that live right around here that dealt with the Bastrop fires. This is applying the research that allows you, and I don't know enough about it myself, not being in that field, but it's a wildfire prevention mechanism that allows you to monitor the power lines so that you can anticipate sparks and take care of it before it turns into a fire, which is what the huge fire we had here at Bastrop was all about. That's what ignited that. That is a wonderful way that we're showing the application of research to the real world and how it's so important that we fund that and we support that. We also spent a lot of time, obviously this last session, on House Bill 5, which had to do with public education, the curriculum, graduation requirements, and accountability. And of course, that's very significant to what happens in higher education as well. And some of the competing interests there had a lot to do with career technology education versus college prep, and whether or not those could be the same thing. Can we offer flexible pathways that allow students to pick one pathway but have all the options in place because they've had a foundational program that if they change over time, they can take these other pathways? Very, very difficult conversations to have. Recently, the State Board of Education is looking at Algebra 2 and whether that should be a required component of all of the different endorsements that we have through the different pathways to graduate from high school. You know, let me just step back a second and tell you, we have 150 House members. I won't deal with the Senate. I'll let Senator Zaffarini do that. But we come from all over the state with a wide variety of backgrounds and experiences and educational preparations and whatever that we bring to make these decisions. And those 150 of us somehow have to understand not only higher education, but every other topic, every other thing that state government deals with, from health to insurance to water to transportation, and obviously we can't. We are so dependent upon knowing from you who are in the field about what we really need to be doing, as Representative Patrick was asking. We do need to hear from you because we will be making decisions, right or wrong, and we might as well hear from you and have the kind of information we need that can help us make the best decisions possible. I'm already running out of time. This is what I do. Okay, real quickly, though, I want to mention the TRBs. So grateful to Senator Zaffarini for all of her work on that. This was a total wreck at the Capitol for unbeknownst reasons to a lot of us. We can't figure it out exactly. It had strong bipartisan support. Some things broke down at the very end of the session, so we didn't get the TRBs passed. But we had strong, strong bipartisan support for bringing this up during the 3 special sessions we had last summer. Never could get the governor to put it on the agenda. I'll go back to saying, might not want to refer to this particular example, but I'll go back to saying it matters who you vote for, and it matters what we do over there. We did not get those TRBs in place, and that means that UT didn't get the money for its engineering building. That means that A&M didn't get the money for its life sciences building, and that is ridiculous with the goals that we have in place right now. I still cannot understand that. Oh, there I am. Medical schools, we're so happy about those things, Dr. Sigaro, that have been going on, and that we have it in the Valley now as well as in Austin. I don't know how to turn this off. Real quickly, let me just say there's a bunch of other issues I'd love to talk about, but the final thing I will say has to do with science and the decisions that we make at the Capitol. And I'm not an artist, but I made a little rudimentary drawing of Texas with a circle around it and a strike through it and said, "Welcome to Texas, a no-science state," because I have been dealing, as many of us have, over and over again, with people making decisions over there that fly in the face of facts and science. And it does matter who you vote for, and it does matter that we have people over there who understand what's going on. There have been so many issues, too many for me to even go into. But this last summer, when we were dealing with women's health issues, and we had the physician groups, and we had people talking about how you administer medications, regardless of what the current FDA standards are, because They're not there yet. They're working on it. We just don't have the new ones yet. But the physicians are saying this is how we are administering this safely. We're using evidence-based practice here, and we still turned a blind eye to that. That is really amazing to me, that we have people over there making those decisions that are not listening to what the scientists are saying, and this happens on a regular basis. So I just encourage you to get active, get involved. Talk to us. Make your voices heard. It's uncomfortable sometimes, but we have got to do what's right for Texans. We've got to move things forward, and we need to do it based on real information. So I'm going to stop there. We're going to have some questions and discussion, I think. But before I do, I'd like to invite my colleagues up here, and Betty Sue Masters, if you would also come up as well. And thank you all so much for having us.
It's our pleasure to present to the Academy and ask Betty Sue Masters, as the incoming president, to accept this Senate gavel that you can use at all of your meetings. Along with a sound block. Now, in order to use this, you must know the protocol. You use one bang for every action, 3 bangs to call a meeting to order, and lots of bangs for everything else.
This is threatening. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, let me extend thanks to all 3 of our legislative colleagues. Your comments were great to listen to and very informative. Apropos of Representative Howard's last comment about advice, let me just say to the 3 of you that one of the hopes that we had when TAMEST was created was to establish here in Texas a resource for public leadership that could address the scientific and technical side, engineering, medicine, the technical side of public policy questions. The U.S. Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine have existed since roughly 1862. I don't remember exactly what year. But for 150 years, they have been used extensively as resources for federal agencies and for the Congress to address matters of public policy that have technical components. That has been an immensely valuable function for the federal government and for the U.S. academies. We'd really like to see that same kind of relationship develop here in Texas. There's enormous knowledge and the capacity to investigate among the membership of TAMEST. So I'd like to urge all of you that if you run into a technical issue and you'd like to recruit a team to look at it, I think TAMEST is interested in trying to fulfill that role.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, we have time for questions, so we have a good bit of time for questions. There are microphones on either side, I believe. I want to ask anybody who has a question to go to one of those microphones, and we'll start right here.
Well, thank you, Larry. Let me start. I'm John Jenkins from Texas A&M University, and first of all, let me thank the distinguished state representatives and Senator Zaffrini for your being here today and your excellent presentations. A couple of observations. With regard to moving Texas A&M up in the rankings of acquiring more sponsored research, and also really to address, in some sense, the political challenges of more education, more funding for higher education. About 8 or 9 years ago, I'm sure you know, the Competitive Knowledge Fund was created, which provides originally, in its original inception, provided $1 of additional funding to the higher education institutions for every $10 of externally sponsored research. And that, I think, dipped down some due to a lack of political will or state budget crunches, and I think it's now about 90 cents on every $10 of research funding. But I believe if you want to take the point of view that you get more of what you reward, that if that was, instead of being reduced, was increased, that would incentivize research, and it would also provide capacitance in the institutions. And if there was a small string tied to that competitive knowledge fund, that those dollars were for research. That I think is a politically viable way to get more dollars to the institutions for research, because it is clearly in the economic interest of the state of Texas to bring a few more billions this way. As you know, University of Texas research budget is in the neighborhood of 600 plus billion a year, and A&M is a similar number. So those are approaching $1.5 billion, those two institutions alone, that are raised annually. So I think this is one very, very important point. And I have a second one while I'm busy giving my 50-minute lecture. The other thing I wanted to mention to you, and it is a little bit in the political arena, Larry, sorry, is formally the Senate has advise and consent role on the governor's nominations of regents for the state universities. And I believe there may have been one instance sometime in 1892 when the Senate actually declined to appoint a governor's nomination. So there is an area there for calcium in the spine, and Senator Zafrani, you've shown a lot. This is not a criticism, but if we had some mechanism analogous to appointing judges where, like the American Bar Association gives a 4-point scale of the degree of qualification, that would give political cover for denying nominations to be on the Board of Regents. This would be a very hard thing to get done. It would require leadership out of the governor's office, frankly, I think, to make it happen. But I believe this is something worth thinking about. Is there a way to evaluate the credentials and the competencies of regents to serve in this fiduciary role? It's a very important role. And this, I think, would be an extremely important step in improving the governance at universities. And thank you so much.
Any one of you who wants to take it, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Two excellent points. First, the Competitive Knowledge Fund. I can tell you exactly how that started. That was one of those things that sometimes you may not want to know the process, as Representative Howard noted earlier. But basically, the Competitive Knowledge Fund was initiated for one purpose in discussions, and that was to help the University of Texas at Austin because it was not benefiting from formula funding, because the formula benefits enrollment growth, and UT Austin, of course, has a capped enrollment. Dr. Faulkner was fully aware of that development at that point in time, I believe. So we established that initially in a back room, simply to help the University of Texas at Austin. But the chair of finance is an Aggie. And so he, of course, said, you can't give UT Austin money without also giving A&M money. And so A&M was added. That's exactly what happened. But then Robert Duncan was there, and he's from Lubbock, so he said, well, you all can't give UT and A&M money without putting Texas Tech in there. And then I said, well, you can't give UT and A&M and Texas Tech money without putting U of H in there. And they said, why U of H? I said, Dewhurst is from Houston. Elections have consequences. And so that's how it happened. That's exactly how it started. Intended for one purpose in one institution, and then it grew. And then other institutions were interested in that money. And related to my bill that created the pathway for emerging research universities, and which created two other funds, including the TRIP, the Texas Research Incentive Program, which matches the philanthropy, we established criteria. And on the second or third try, we actually adopted a rider, which is an amendment to the budget, that established criteria for buying into it. An institution has to provide $5 million of its special item funding in order to buy into it and get back the funding that you talked about. And we talked about per $50 million and meet certain criteria. Well, in 2009, I was not on the conference committee, and in my absence, that rider was removed. And then it became more difficult and more political for universities to qualify. But the University of Texas at Dallas qualified, and University of Texas El Paso, University of Texas at Arlington, and which was the other one? Texas Tech, of course, also qualified. So we have those universities that have met the criteria. Do we believe the Competitive Knowledge Fund should be increased in terms of its funding? Absolutely. You have no idea how challenging it is to fight for research dollars. Some of us fight tooth and nail every single session, but we have strong opposition, very strong opposition from those who believe that we should concentrate on teaching. My position is you cannot separate teaching from research at the university level. You simply cannot. It is essential. And so we talk about that level of funding, and we support your insight into that. Regarding your second point, the Senate confirmation, we have actually looked through it. While I was chair of not only the Higher Education Committee, but also the Joint Committee, the Legislative Oversight Committee on Higher Education, Governance, Excellence, and Transparency, we looked specifically at the Regents' qualifications. And we did have 2 bills that focused on Regents and their orientation and their knowledge, and we considered legislation that focused on the criteria. The one that passed was vetoed. The other legislation had no opportunity for passage. So there we are, because the governor nominates, the Senate advises and consents, but we cannot pass legislation without considering the governor's veto, because that is an awful outcome after a really concentrated effort to do the same. I will tell you that even before I was higher education chair and to this date, the minute anyone is nominated to a board of regents, we send a letter that says, congratulations, look forward to meeting with you. Please ask your staff member to call mine so that I can meet with you before your confirmation. And I actually meet or try to meet with every nominee to every board of regents in this state, not just my alma mater, every board of regents, because it is absolutely essential that we know their qualifications. Sometimes they slip by us. And yes, we have failed to confirm several nominees during my tenure in the Texas Senate, and in fact, I have orchestrated 2 of those. So it does happen. It does happen. And there are many times that people have not been blocked because they haven't been to a hearing, because it's so obvious that we have the votes to block them. And in the case of one person whom I blocked, he actually never appeared before the committee. Governor Bush withdrew it. The other one, under Governor Clements, he said, let them deal with me. I don't believe they won't confirm me. And he was not confirmed. And I will tell you that was Carl Rove. He was not confirmed to serve on the Board of Regents at East Texas State. So we do it. Thank you.
Let's go to Bob Curl.
I realize from your conversations that this is preaching to the choir, but I do think it's important that somebody here mention the Advanced Technology Program, the Advanced Research Program, and the Norman Hackerman Program. As you may know, at one point between the ATP and the ARP, there was a $60 million biennial budget for these research programs for Texas universities. Currently, it's $1 million, and it was $1 million the last time. Now, I just want to urge you to try to get this program up to a level of funding where it actually, the money will actually make a difference in the state of Texas.
Do you want me to take that?
Well, I can address that generally. I know that Diane and I, both on the House side in appropriations, talked many times and had many discussions in our subcommittee about how to strengthen our investments in programs such as that, and in the line items such as that. The general response I'm going to give you is not a good one, but it is the reality that Texas's budget is not sufficient to pay for what we currently have in the budget, much less to increase, and that's part of our dilemma. We, in Texas, of course, are required to have a balanced budget. Unlike the federal government, we have some constitutional constraints upon what we can do in terms of pay-as-you-go and in terms of spending limits that are determined by the Legislative Budget Board. We have been relying on deferrals of payments into subsequent budgets in order to balance our budget. We have been relying on using dollars that have been brought in by tax or fee purposes for one particular purpose, and rather than appropriating it for those purposes, holding on to those revenues in order to balance our budget. These are very serious issues when you know, you're absolutely right. We need to be investing, we need to be funding at the level that we were funding. We have the same issue with public education, with higher education, of course. We are not funding sufficiently all kinds of other programs within the state. We have some serious budgetary challenges that require that we are willing to lay these things out on the table and have some real discussions about where our revenue comes from, what our ultimate goals are, how much that costs, and how we want to pay for it. So you are preaching to the choir in terms of our being sympathetic to what you say. I'm afraid to say that we do have some real challenges that prevent us from doing that right now. But that doesn't mean we're not going to advocate for it, and very much appreciate your comments about it. Thank you.
I would just like to add that going back to 2011, when we were facing a $27 billion deficit, we had to make cuts all across the state budget. It affected everything that the state funds. Education took a hard hit because education is the biggest chunk of the budget. But one of the decisions that we made facing that challenge in 2011 is that we had a number of special item requests. And we were sitting there at the Capitol thinking about which one does the university need the most, which university needs it the most, et cetera. We finally came to the conclusion that it was best left to local control, that we would provide the funding, although it was reduced from what it had been, and that we would let institutions decide which programs that they felt were indeed special, that they wanted to fund from those particular funds that were granted. So you saw a shift in philosophy that began at that time of 2011, moving away from special items.
One comment I'd like to make, and that is these research programs, the ARP and it's now called Norman Hackerman, is a peer-reviewed research program open to any researcher in the state of Texas. So, and the peer reviewers are coming from outside of the state. So if you want to know where the money is best spent on research, I believe that peer review is better than university administrators for deciding that.
Thank you.
Well, there are people who will agree with you, I'm sure. But
There they are.
But during my comments, I talked about the difference in funding levels from one session to another, and I said we increased funding for 2015 during the 2013 session in comparison to the session before, but that's when it was cut from the session before. So your example fits in neatly with my comments. For example, the Norman Ackerman Research Fund was funded at $1 million for 2015 in 2013. That was a 0% change from the session before. So it wasn't cut, while the other research funds were increased. However, underscore, however, the previous session, it was $16 million.
That's correct. It was 2009, but the Banium started.
Right. So it went from 16 million to 1, and it is at 1. And you see, those are the figures. That's the reality of it. What is the difference? The difference is that the other funds tend to have more support because that funding goes directly to the institutions. So the presidents and the chancellors and some of the faculty members come to us and they advocate very effectively, and I appreciate it, on behalf of their institutions. But the Norman Hackerman Fund is coordinated by the coordinating board, and it does have a competitive peer review process. It goes directly to the researcher. And it is for that reason, because there have not been strong advocates for it. I will tell you this, I do consider myself a champion of higher education. Not one person has ever spoken to me on behalf of this fund, but I support it because I understand its value and its importance. But the only way to increase the funding is to advocate effectively for it.
Well, actually, I did advocate. I missed seeing you, but I saw a number of other people in the legislature, and it sort of made a difference, because what came out of the House was an increase in funding from $1 million to $3 million. What came out of the Senate was an increase in funding from $1 million to $2 million. What came out of the conference was $1 million.
The budget is written in conference committee, and you understand I said that I wasn't on the conference committee recently. So when I was on there, I fought hard, very, very hard for research. That was one of my priorities.
Thank you, Bob. Question here.
My name is Robert Baker, and I've been a professor at Texas Tech for more than 45 years. I would like, at the end of my career, to leave an endowment that is substantial to foster the research success that we've had there. To do that, you need to raise, I think, $4 to $7 million, $8 million. If you had $5 million, you would have about $200,000 each year to foster that research and to give students grants and things like that. You have a TRIP fund that is active right now, and it's very successful, I think. And so if you have some rules, like if you write a $100,000 check, you can get a 50% match, but you have to have a single check. If you write a million, I think it'll match it 100%. I want to actively raise $7 or $8 million, but to do that, it's going to be hard to get a lot of people to give $100,000 in a single check. I think if you would, that's a resource. When we had our Horizon campaign, I chaired the faculty staff funding. We raised $17 million from the faculty staff. I think you've got a group of people that are faculty. I think they want to give endowments. They want to leave a legacy. But I think it would be really more advantageous if you would not put too many ways that keep them from, give them ways that they can succeed. Give them, say, once you've raised $1 million, then we'll match everything else you bring in for a full match or something, because we'll work with you. I'll be glad to do that, but it's tough to get different people, especially if you use former students and things like that. A lot of those people don't have $100,000 or more that they can write a check for to get that match. So I also want to thank you for the work you do and for being in our Congress, and I appreciate your efforts. So thank you.
Thank you. Your reference is to a bill that I authored, Senate Bill 9, that became House Bill 51, and we created the TRIP Fund, the Texas Research Incentive Program, specifically to motivate and to inspire philanthropists. And so we were looking at the bigger dollars, the bigger contributions. This is the first time that I've heard a suggestion such as yours, and we will be happy to work with you during this interim and to consider that and consider changing the rules if there is enough support and interest and if they are feasible. We are certainly interested in hearing your perspective. I would be happy to meet with you for that purpose. But so far it has been very, very successful. To be perfectly frank with you, we thought the first time that the University of Houston was going to raise the most money, followed by the University of Texas at Dallas because they're in metropolitan areas, but it was Texas Tech that came in first. And it was Texas Tech that was organized and ready to go when the period of evaluation started. And Texas Tech did an outstanding job. And interestingly, most of their contributions came from Houston. So I met with the chancellor and with some of the regents, and I said, Texas Tech.
I need to know those people.
Yeah, I said, Texas. I said, now you understand. They said, well, most of these people who can afford this kind of contribution gave to Texas Tech because that's their alma mater. I said, you have to understand the psychology of the rich. Anybody who can write a check for $1 million can write another one. And I said, you get that list of people who contributed to Texas Tech and now ask them to also contribute to their hometown university, U of H.
We've already donated $200,000 in the last year, and we are going to donate another $100,000 in the next month because I can do that legally without having to pay taxes because I'm doing it out of my retirement fund. But just there are a whole series of complications that in trying to do that, and if you just can think with us and figure out a way that we can go out and raise money, because I want that legacy. I want that legacy, and I'm anxious to work for it. I think I can raise that amount of money, but I also want the help.
We'll work with you.
Thank you.
We are very close to the available time. We have one last questioner. I hope it's a quick question.
So really just a comment, and no answers needed, but I'm Gordon England, and I'm independent. That is, member of the Academy, but not associated with the university, so perhaps a little different perspective. Given that funds are limited, education is very expensive, I think we need to think about education as largely unchanged for about 800 years. You know, we still bring students to the font of knowledge. We do that at all levels of education. And in the last at least 25 years, but literally throughout that 800 years, technology has upended lots of companies, like lots of turmoil. Education systems largely immune to technology in terms of utilizing it. Around the edges, yes, it gets utilized, but fundamentally still the same. Given internet, and we see some things happening now, so people are putting their toe in new kinds of education systems. My view, however, is technology is going to change rapidly. And what we know today with the internet is probably at the 1% point. You're going to see dramatic changes, probably 5 or 10 years, and that will affect education. And I frankly believe we should be doing work in the state of Texas. We should be doing research in the state of Texas in terms of how that technology should affect education so we can have better educational systems and actually lead the nation in the future, as opposed to, I think, what a lot of states will do will be follow, and I don't think will be competitive. My analogy is phone. I mean, you can go around the world. Countries that did not have phone systems no longer have to wire in a phone system, right? They can benefit directly from a wireless system. I think you're going to see education around the world the same way, and they are all going to be competitive with the United States. So my view is it behooves Texas. I think the legislature and universities in Texas need to be looking at some research, looking forward for the next 5, 10, 20 years, because it will change. And we need to be at the forefront of that change. Comment. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
My career as moderator of legislators is coming to an end. And but I did promise them they would get out of here by 1:50, and I want to deliver on that promise. So let's thank our legislators.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have one more piece of business, so please don't wander off. It won't take long, I promise. But our president this year of TAMEST is Dr. Betty Sue Masters. She is one of the state's leading scientists, member of the Institute of Medicine, holder of the Robert Welch Chair at Health Science Center San Antonio. Betty Sue, thank you for agreeing to serve as our president, and let you have the final word at our annual meeting.
Thank you, David, very much. I'm going to try to use this, but Judy didn't instruct me on how to end the meeting, so I don't know how many taps to make. Well, as my first act as the new president, and I take this position with great humility. This is one of the finest organizations that I've ever been associated with, and I'm very proud to to take this office. I want Lynn Draper to come up here, please.
I'm not coming up if you have that hair.
Lynn has served us with great distinction. He has been very much involved in the organization and the carrying out of this meeting. I've enjoyed meeting you and getting to know you better, just as colleagues. And I want to present you with this token of our appreciation for your service as president of TAMEST.
Well, thank you very much. I will say it's been a great pleasure. It has been absolutely terrific. Thank you for all your support during the year. I know the organization has now fallen into competent hands, but I thank you for what you have done for me, and I know you'll do the very same for Betty Sue. Thanks a lot.
Well, before I let you go, I do want to say something about Tinsley Oden and this meeting. I think this has been a superb, we've heard this from a number of our speakers, by the way, of how much they appreciated the organization of this meeting, the topic, the excitement of it. And I do want to tell you that Tinsley needs our hand for a very prestigious prize that he won in 2013, the Honda Prize. For his field in computational mechanics. He's been a forerunner in that field. I hope Tinsley's here. Oh, there you are. Okay. The light's in my face. The Secretariat widely praised him for his expertise and his accomplishments, and talked about his integration of mathematics and computer science, physics, and applied mathematics, all in order to solve problems in science and engineering. And I think his organization of this meeting has reflected his expertise and his ability to bring fine speakers and excellent scientists together. And I want to congratulate Tinsley on the organization of this meeting. Thank you very much. So as my parting remarks, I want to remind you that there is a summit meeting on water problems May the 19th, and it'll be held here in Austin. And to remember that next January is another meeting of TAMEST, January 22nd and 23rd at the Omni Galleria in Houston, and the topic of that conference will be cancer research. So thank you all for coming, and I'll look forward to your support, and please give me any ideas that you have for missions that TAMEST should take on. Thank you very much. And I will use this. We're adjourned.